Ozzy Osbourne isn't just a rock star, he's a living legend. From his early days fronting Black Sabbath to his decades-long solo career, he's shaped the sound and attitude of heavy metal itself. He's been called the Godfather of Metal, the Madman, and of course, the Prince of Darkness. But for all the records he's sold and the shows he's played, Ozzy's legacy isn't just about music. It's about personality. Ozzy has never been the type to bite his tongue. If he likes you, you'll know it. If he doesn't, you'll know that too. His career is filled with unfiltered opinions, outrageous moments, and clashes with some of the biggest names in rock and beyond. And these weren't little disagreements. Some of them spiraled into legendary rivalries that fans still talk about today. Sometimes it was business, disputes over songwriting credits, touring arrangements, or the future of a band. Sometimes it was personal, bruised egos, hurt pride, or insults that went too far. And sometimes it was pure rock and roll chaos, the kind of combustible energy that happens when two massive personalities meet and refuse to back down. What makes Ozzy's rivalries so fascinating is that they often blurred the line between friendship and feud. He shared the stage with some of these people, toured with them, even laughed with them, only to trade jabs later in the press or find himself on the opposite side of a public controversy. That mix of camaraderie and conflict is part of what makes Ozzy one of the most unpredictable figures in music history. So today, we're counting down 10 of Ozzy Osbourne's most famous and fascinating rivalries. Some ended with handshakes, some never healed, and a few still have fans arguing over who was in the right. But in every single one, Ozzy stayed exactly who he's always been, brutally honest, unapologetically himself, and never, ever boring. Number 10, Fred Durst. By the turn of the millennium, the sound of heavy music had shifted dramatically. Gone were the days when classic heavy metal acts like Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath dominated the airwaves. In their place rose a new wave of rock, nu metal. Leading the charge was Fred Durst, the backward cap-wearing frontman of Limp Bizkit, a band that fused rap, metal, and raw aggression into a style that became the soundtrack of early 2000s MTV. On paper, Ozzy and Durst had something in common. Both were larger-than-life personalities who thrived on controversy and spectacle. But musically and culturally, they came from entirely different worlds. Ozzy's career had been forged in the late 1960s and early 70s when heavy metal was being invented in sweaty clubs and hostile venues long before it was mainstream. Limp Bizkit, on the other hand, exploded into popularity with the full backing of major labels, nonstop MTV rotation, and a youth culture that embraced their rebellious, in-your-face persona almost overnight. While Ozzy never launched a direct attack on Fred Durst in public, those in his orbit say he was skeptical of the nu metal movement and of Durst in particular. For Ozzy, heavy metal was about musicianship, grit, and surviving the grind. To him, Limp Bizkit's success felt like it came too easy, riding a cultural wave rather than carving their place out the hard way. That skepticism was magnified by Durst's well-known ego and tendency to proclaim himself one of the biggest rock stars on the planet, which clashed with Ozzy's belief that you let the music, not your mouth, prove your worth. There were also subtle signs of that disconnect in the touring world. While Ozzfest was known for showcasing a wide spectrum of heavy acts, Limp Bizkit never became a regular fixture on the festival. Sharon Osbourne and Fred Durst had their share of public disagreements over the years, with Sharon famously calling Durst arrogant and questioning his professionalism after festival-related disputes. While she was the one speaking publicly, few doubted that Ozzy shared at least some of those sentiments behind closed doors. Fans also noticed the divide. In online forums and fan circles at the time, Limp Bizkit was often used as the lightning rod in debates over what real metal meant. Many in Ozzy's fan base saw Durst as the face of a watered-down, commercialized version of the genre, one that traded technical skill and raw authenticity for style, attitude, and MTV-friendly hooks. For die-hard Sabbath-era metalheads, Limp Bizkit's music wasn't carrying the torch. It was burning it for a quick flash of fame. Still, Ozzy is nothing if not pragmatic. He's always understood that music evolves, and even if he didn't personally embrace Limp Bizkit's style, he knew they had a massive audience. There was no open war between the two men, but there was an undeniable philosophical gap, one that spoke to a broader generational divide in metal. Ozzy stood for the origins, gritty, dangerous, and born out of hard-earned respect. Fred Durst represented a newer breed, flashier, faster rising, and built for the spotlight. It wasn't the kind of feud that made headlines, but it was a tension felt in the subtext of interviews, backstage politics, and fan conversations, the quiet friction between the old guard and the new, each looking at the other and knowing they were playing two very different games. Number 9, Bon Jovi. In the world of rock, Bon Jovi and Ozzy Osbourne might seem like they come from completely different planets. Bon Jovi's music has always leaned toward the polished, radio-friendly side of rock, anthemic choruses, love ballads, and an image tailor-made for mainstream success. Ozzy, on the other hand, has built his entire career on chaos, darkness, and a brand of heavy metal that was never designed to be family-friendly. On the surface, there's no real reason for these two worlds to collide. And yet they did, in a way that was as much personal as it was musical. The spark came from inside Ozzy's own home. His daughter Kelly was, and still is, a massive Bon Jovi fan. She's talked openly about how she adored the band growing up, blasting their albums around the house. For most parents, that would be a harmless bit of teenage obsession. But for Ozzy, it became a running source of irritation. He's joked in interviews that he couldn't stand how much Bon Jovi's music was being played in his house, and it was clear from his tone that the irritation was only half in jest. Part of that may have been personal taste. Ozzy has always gravitated toward heavier, darker music, and Bon Jovi's glossy pop rock approach is about as far from War Pigs or Crazy Train as you can get. But there was also a deeper cultural divide. By the late 80s, Bon Jovi had become one of the biggest bands in the world, representing a slicker, MTV-friendly brand of rock that sold millions but often got mocked by the heavier metal community for being too soft. For someone like Ozzy, who came from the gritty working-class birth of heavy metal, Bon Jovi's image might have felt a little too manufactured. Ozzy never launched a direct public feud with John Bon Jovi or the band, but his comments about not being able to escape their music at home were a window into his feelings. Sharon Osbourne has also made playful jabs about the difference between Ozzy's world and Bon Jovi's, highlighting the gulf between the darker, more aggressive side of rock and the polished, chart-topping, pop rock sound Bon Jovi perfected. It's worth noting that the two acts have crossed paths in the industry without any major incidents, but there's an unspoken truth here. Bon Jovi's music, as catchy and successful as it is, represents a kind of commercialized rock that Ozzy has never been part of and never wanted to be. In a way, the tension is symbolic. It's the clash between two very different visions of what rock music can be, one built for arenas and mass radio play, and one forged in the shadows of heavy riffs and dark themes. And while Ozzy has always been careful to avoid outright hostility in public, fans know that if you'd walked into the Osbourne household during Kelly's Bon Jovi phase, you'd have heard two things loud and clear: the sound of "Livin' on a Prayer" blaring from the speakers, and Ozzy in the background muttering about it. Number 8, Metallica few bands have a history with Ozzy Osbourne quite like Metallica. Their relationship began in 1986 when Metallica were still hungry up-and-comers trying to break into the mainstream. That year, Ozzy invited them to open for him on his U.S. tour, a move that would help catapult Metallica to a whole new level. Over the years, the mutual respect between the two acts remained, but that didn't mean there weren't moments of friction. As Metallica's fame skyrocketed in the late 80s and 90s, they became one of the biggest bands in the world, in some ways eclipsing Ozzy's solo profile. While Ozzy never publicly attacked Metallica, there was an unspoken sense of the student becoming the master that can sometimes make for awkward dynamics in rock. The connection between them deepened years later through bassist Robert Trujillo, who played with Ozzy before joining Metallica in 2003. Trujillo has spoken warmly about his time with Ozzy, but his move to Metallica was a reminder that the two bands had more in common than just a shared history. They were competing for many of the same festival slots, audiences, and cultural space within the metal world. There's also a stylistic divide worth noting. While Ozzy's music has always had a dark, melodic sensibility, Metallica's thrash roots gave them a harder, more aggressive edge. As both acts evolved, there were inevitable debates among fans about who truly represented the face of heavy metal. In the end, there's no bad blood. Both Ozzy and Metallica have acknowledged each other's impact on the genre. Metallica even paid tribute to Ozzy at his final show, a gesture that spoke volumes about their respect for him. But the relationship has always had a competitive undercurrent, a reminder that even in a genre built on rebellion, the battle for the crown of metal never really ends. Number 7, Jake E. Lee. When Jake E. Lee joined Ozzy Osbourne's band in 1982, the circumstances were intense. Randy Rhoads had just passed away in a tragic plane crash, and Ozzy needed a guitarist who could not only fill that void, but also help keep his solo career alive. Jake brought the goods, a mix of technical skill, raw energy, and a knack for writing riffs that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the best in metal. His arrival would lead to one of Ozzy's most important solo albums, Bark at the Moon. Released in 1983, Bark at the Moon marked a turning point for Ozzy. Jake's guitar work was central to its success, giving the record a heavier edge while still delivering catchy hooks. Fans embraced the title track instantly, and it remains a staple in Ozzy's setlist to this day. But as much as the album solidified Ozzy's comeback, it also became the source of one of the most talked about disputes in his career. According to Jake, before the album's release, Sharon Osbourne presented him with a contract that removed his songwriting credits. He's claimed in multiple interviews that he was told to sign it or lose his spot in the band, a move that meant all official credit went to Ozzy, while Jake received only a flat payment. Sharon has denied forcing him into the deal, but Jake has never wavered in his version of events, calling it a betrayal that still stings decades later. By 1987, Jake was gone from Ozzy's lineup, replaced by Zakk Wylde. There was no big public falling out, but the absence of recognition for Bark at the Moon left a bitter aftertaste. To this day, fans debate just how much of Ozzy's mid-'80s sound came from Jake E. Lee's guitar, and whether his name should have been right there alongside Ozzy's in the songwriting credits. Number 6, Motley Crue. When Ozzy Osbourne and Motley Crue toured together in 1984, it was like mixing gasoline with a blowtorch. Both were notorious for pushing the limits of rock and roll excess, Heavy drinking, drug use, and outrageous antics were part of the daily routine. But while the tour was a commercial success, behind the scenes, it became one of the wildest and most chaotic chapters in either act's history. Nikki Sixx, Vince Neil, and the rest of Motley Crue were at the peak of their self-destructive lifestyle, and Ozzy, deep in his own battles with addiction, was more than willing to match them shot for shot. Stories from that tour have become rock legend. The infamous incident where Ozzy, in a moment of drunken insanity, snorted a line of ants off the pavement in front of the band, or the time he urinated on a sidewalk in public while daring others to outdo him. These weren't just exaggerated road stories. Both Ozzy and the band have confirmed them over the years, but the bond between Ozzy and Motley Crue wasn't without its frictions. Traveling together under those conditions meant egos, tempers, and exhaustion often clashed. Nikki Sixx has admitted in interviews that Ozzy's unpredictability could be just as dangerous off stage as it was thrilling on stage. There were moments when pranks went too far, or competition for crowd reactions created subtle tension. And while there was mutual respect musically, the lifestyle competition, who could be the craziest, who could party the hardest, sometimes pushed things into risky territory. Despite the madness, the tour cemented both acts' reputations as the ultimate wild men of metal. The rivalry here wasn't about bad blood so much as it was about one-upmanship. Ozzy and Motley Crue weren't trying to destroy each other. They were trying to outdo each other. And in doing so, they created a touring partnership that's still talked about as one of the most outrageous in rock history. Number 5, Kiss. Ozzy Osbourne and Kiss have crossed paths many times over the decades, and while they share mutual respect as rock icons, there's also been a noticeable undercurrent of tension. Part of it comes down to the way each side approaches the business of music. Kiss, led by Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, has always been unapologetic about treating the band as a brand. Merchandise, marketing, and spectacle are just as much a part of their identity as the music itself. Ozzy, on the other hand, has always thrived on chaos, personality, and the unpredictability of his performances, with less emphasis on corporate polish. In interviews, Gene Simmons has been complimentary toward Ozzy, but he's also made comments about authenticity in rock that some fans believe were aimed, at least partially, at performers like Ozzy. Gene has publicly stated that while theatrics are important, a band's foundation has to be airtight, hinting that too much focus on persona can overshadow musicianship. While never naming Ozzy directly, it's hard to ignore that such remarks came during years when Ozzy's wild image sometimes eclipsed his music in the press. There's also Sharon Osbourne's history with Kiss to consider. Sharon and Gene have had public disagreements over the years, from TV talent shows to industry dealings, and because Sharon has been such a central force in managing Ozzy's career, any friction she has inevitably bleeds into his professional relationships. The Osbournes' blunt, no-filter style has clashed with the more calculated PR approach of the Kiss camp more than once. That said, Kiss and Ozzy have shared bills, festivals, and mutual admiration for each other's ability to put on a show. But there's always been that sense that they represent two very different schools of rock. Kiss is about the machine, a tightly run empire of music, merchandise, and branding. Ozzy is about the man, unpredictable, dangerous, and utterly unique. Put them in the same room and you have two forces that can respect each other's power, while still quietly wondering whose approach truly rules rock and roll. Number 4, Black Sabbath. For all of Ozzy Osbourne's wild stories and feuds, no rivalry in his career is as deeply personal as the one with his original bandmates in Black Sabbath. This wasn't just a professional split, it was the painful unraveling of a musical family that had changed the world. Black Sabbath wasn't only where Ozzy got his start, It was where heavy metal itself was born. But by the late 1970s, years of relentless touring, creative disagreements, and drug and alcohol abuse had pushed the band to a breaking point. By 1979, Ozzy's substance abuse had reached dangerous levels, and his reliability as a frontman was suffering. Behind the scenes, guitarist Tony Iommi, bassist Geezer Butler, and drummer Bill Ward were trying to keep the band moving forward, but tensions were high. Eventually, the decision was made. Ozzy had to go. As Tony later put it, it was either we break up or we carry on without him. To Ozzy, it felt like a betrayal from people he considered brothers. The split sent Ozzy into a downward spiral, but it also sparked one of the most remarkable comebacks in rock history. With Sharon Osbourne taking the reins as his manager, Ozzy launched a solo career that quickly rivaled and in some ways surpassed Sabbath's post-Ozzy output. Still, the wounds from his firing lingered. There were years of bitterness, public jabs, and even legal disputes over the use of the Black Sabbath name and royalties. Yet, as with many long-running rock rivalries, time began to heal some of the scars. Over the years, there were brief reunions, co-headlining tours, and finally a full reunion for 13, Sabbath's 2013 album with Ozzy back on vocals. Even so, there's always been an undercurrent of unresolved tension, the weight of shared history, hurt feelings, and the knowledge that no matter how many times they came back together, they could never fully undo the split of 1979. For fans, it's a reminder that the greatest bands aren't just built on talent, they're held together by fragile human bonds. And when those break, the impact lasts a lifetime. 3. Iron Maiden. When it comes to Ozzy Osbourne's rivalries, few have been as public or as messy as his feud with Iron Maiden. The tension exploded during Ozzfest 2005, turning what should have been a celebration of heavy metal into one of the most infamous concert controversies in the genre's history. The trouble began when Iron Maiden's frontman Bruce Dickinson made comments during the tour that many believed were digs at Ozzy and his wife, Sharon Osbourne. Bruce reportedly criticized reality TV, a possible jab at the Osbournes, which had turned Ozzy into a household name beyond metal fans, and he also took swipes at bands that rely on TV to stay relevant. For Sharon, these comments crossed a line, and she decided to respond in a way that fans still argue about to this day. During Iron Maiden's final Ozzfest performance, the sound system mysteriously cut out multiple times during their set. On top of that, members of the audience, allegedly at Sharon's direction, began pelting the band with eggs and other objects. Bruce, ever the showman, kept performing, but the animosity was obvious. The spectacle quickly became the talk of the rock press, with some defending Iron Maiden's right to speak their minds and others siding with Sharon and Ozzy for defending their brand. Ozzy himself stayed relatively quiet publicly, letting Sharon be the face of the feud. Still, it's hard to imagine he didn't take Bruce's comments personally. Iron Maiden and Ozzy both represent different eras and styles of British heavy metal, and there's always been a competitive edge between them. For many fans, Ozzfest 2005 wasn't just about one band throwing shade at another. It was about a clash between two titans of the genre, each fiercely protective of their legacy. And while the years have dulled some of the heat, the story remains one of the most notorious examples of rock and roll drama spilling over into the spotlight. Number 2, Roger Waters. Most of Ozzy Osbourne's rivalries played out while he was alive, on stage, and in the thick of the music world. But the clash with Roger Waters, former Pink Floyd frontman, happened after Ozzy's passing, proving that even in death, the Prince of Darkness could stir up controversy. The incident began when Roger Waters made dismissive remarks about Ozzy's legacy, downplaying his impact on music and questioning his artistic merit compared to other rock icons. Coming from a figure as respected and as outspoken as Waters, the comments landed like a bomb in the rock community. For many fans, it felt like an unnecessary and disrespectful swipe at someone who had not only defined heavy metal, but also maintained a career spanning over 5 decades. The backlash was swift, and it didn't just come from fans. Ozzy's son, Jack Osbourne, came out swinging in defense of his father, calling Waters pathetic and tearing into him publicly. Jack accused Waters of seeking attention and of disrespecting a man whose influence reached far beyond just album sales or critical acclaim. The exchange quickly made headlines, sparking debates in the music press and among fans about the boundaries of criticism, and about whether Waters had crossed a line by taking shots at someone who was no longer around to respond. While Ozzy himself never had the chance to address the remarks, the feud underscored something that's always been true about his legacy. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. Even years after his death, Ozzy's name still commands enough weight to ignite heated arguments, and in this case, one that pulled in 2 of rock's most famous families. The Roger Waters dust-up may have been brief, but it showed that the battle for Ozzy's reputation didn't end when his career did. Number 1, Judas Priest. When it comes to defining the sound of British heavy metal, Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest stand side by side as 2 of its most important pillars. Both emerged from England's industrial heartland, Ozzy from Birmingham with Black Sabbath, and Judas Priest just a short distance away in the same city. Their careers overlapped for decades, and with that overlap came a mix of mutual respect, competition, and moments of tension that fans still talk about today. In the late 70s and early 80s, Judas Priest was on a meteoric rise, perfecting a sharper, faster, and more aggressive sound that contrasted with Sabbath's darker, doomier style. Priest frontman Rob Halford became known as the Metal God, and their twin guitar attack was pushing the boundaries of what heavy metal could sound like. Ozzy, meanwhile, was embarking on his solo career after leaving Sabbath, and he knew that keeping his momentum meant not just surviving, but outshining the new wave of metal that bands like Judas Priest were leading. While both acts often shared festival stages and even tour bills, there were undercurrents of rivalry. Some fans and critics claimed Judas Priest had taken elements of Sabbath's sound and refined them for a new generation, while others argued that Ozzy's solo work was keeping pace by leaning into melody and theatrics in ways Priest didn't. The competition wasn't always friendly either. There were whispers in the press about scheduling disputes, billing order disagreements, and even accusations from within the industry that the 2 camps weren't always thrilled about sharing the spotlight. Despite this, the respect between the 2 acts was real, and it showed in moments like Rob Halford stepping in to perform with Black Sabbath when Ozzy was unavailable for certain shows. But that didn't erase the fact that for much of the 80s, Ozzy and Judas Priest were locked in a fight for dominance in the same genre they both helped build. They were 2 heavyweights from the same hometown, each pushing the other to go harder, faster, and bigger. And in the process, they kept British heavy metal at the forefront of the global scene, even if neither side would ever admit they were watching the other that closely. From the smoky clubs of Birmingham to the largest arenas on earth, Ozzy Osbourne has lived a life defined by extremes: extreme music, extreme chaos, and extreme honesty. These rivalries weren't just side stories. They were mile markers in a career that refused to follow anyone else's rules. Some were born out of competition, pushing him to prove himself against younger, hungrier bands. Others came from deep personal wounds, betrayals, business disputes, and words that could never be taken back. And a few were pure rock and roll madness, where egos and antics collided in ways no one could have scripted. Through it all, Ozzy never hid behind polite diplomacy. Whether the clash was with an old bandmate, a rising star, or another rock legend, he showed up as his unfiltered self. And that's why fans love him. Because in an industry full of carefully crafted images, Ozzy remained raw, unpredictable, and unapologetically real. These feuds didn't just create tension, they helped define the heavy metal landscape. They forced bands to sharpen their sound, raise their game, and fight for their place in the spotlight. In that way, Ozzy's rivalries shaped not only his own career, but the very history of rock and metal. And now, the question is yours. Which of these rivalries was the most explosive, the most justified, or the most unforgettable? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more untold stories from the legends of rock, hit subscribe. Because in the world of music history, there's always another feud waiting to be told.